This is David Olshan of Nevada Legal Services. This is another in our series of helpful videos regarding substantive law. This video covers being judgment proof and exemptions that apply in chapters 7 and 13 of the Federal Bankruptcy Code. The first thing we need to do is define judgment proof. Basically, it's the quality of being able to protect your income and assets from collection by judgment creditors. So if a judgment is entered against you, a creditor can then garnish your wages or take your property to pay off that debt. However, Nevada exemptions will protect you. That's why we have a shield there, because judgment proof is a big shield to protect you from creditors. Some people call it collection proof. That makes absolutely no sense because there's no difference in the meaning between collection proof and judgment proof. It's just lawyers who want to confuse debtors and people who don't know into thinking they know more than the layperson. So you can think of judgment proof as being a shield. It shields your income and assets from judgment creditors. It's useful as long as income and assets are exempt, and it requires constant vigilance because even though you're judgment proof, you still have to file a claim of exemption if a judgment creditor tries to garnish your wages or attach your property. In bankruptcy, it's more of a sword. It destroys debts, unsecured debts. It cudgels collectors. Most contact from collectors or creditors is illegal. And of course, it discharges your debt. Passive peace, you check your credit after 60 days after the discharge to make sure all your balances are zero and you have a fresh start. The judgment proof profile is anyone who has income of less than $362.50 per week. Nevada law allows you to keep 50 times the minimum wage, or $362.50 a week. A creditor can take 25% of your wages if your earnings exceed $770 per week. If your earnings are between $770 and $442, then the creditor can take 18%. Now, why we have this change, it is very confusing, but that's what advocates passed in 2017. It does make it much more complicated, but just keep in mind that you can keep up to 75% or 82% of your disposable income, which is your take-home wages, under Nevada exemption law. Other income like Social Security, child support, unemployment benefits, veterans benefits, that is exempt, so you don't need to worry about this complicated math. It's exempt, and as long as you don't infect it with non-exempt money in your bank account, you will be able to keep all of that if a judgment creditor comes knocking at your door. For assets, we allow in Nevada up to $605,000 in equity, one car up to $15,000 in equity, and of course, you're going to take the value of the car, subtract out how much you owe, and that's your equity. So most people don't have $15,000 in equity in a car. If it's adapted for disabled, then you get any amount. It could be worth $100,000 and it's still exempt. Household goods, that's $12,000 in exemptions. And we also have a wild card or catch-all, $10,000. So if you have money in a bank account or you're above $12,000 in household goods, you can use this wild card exemption to exempt money or property. If your income and assets are exempt, you must file a claim of exemption if a judgment creditor tries to take anything from you. So a notice from the creditor of garnishment or attachment, it means that it's impending, it will happen soon. So what you need to do is file a claim of exemption within 10 days of service of the notice. If you do that and your property is exempt, you will get to keep that property. If you do not file this claim of exemption, you will lose that property. So that's why it requires constant vigilance. Bankruptcy exemptions are state law exemptions. Nevada law does not allow federal exemptions in a bankruptcy. It really doesn't matter because Nevada exemptions are way better than federal exemptions. So when you do file for bankruptcy, you need to be a resident of Nevada for 2 years prior to filing to use Nevada exemptions. If you haven't lived here for 2 years, then you're going to have to use the exemption law from the state where you came from, and that gets rather complicated if you haven't lived there for 6 months prior to moving to Nevada. If you want to use the homestead exemption, you have to have owned the house for 40 months, and you must live here for 2 years. So keep that in mind. If you are filing for bankruptcy and want to exempt your house, you have to have owned it for 4 years, or 40 months, sorry, and have lived in Nevada for 2 years. For the homestead exemption to apply, you must live in the home in Nevada, and also you must have filed a homestead declaration with the county recorder. A husband and wife cannot double the exemption amount, and you don't need to file a homestead declaration if you don't own the property upon which your home sits, like a mobile home or a condo. Also, the $605,000 limit does not apply if what we're talking about is a medical bill. So these are some of the nuances regarding the homestead exemption. You must file a declaration before you file for bankruptcy, and you must live in the home if you want to claim that homestead exemption for real property. These are the other exemptions, and in our YouTube channel, I will contain a link to the Nevada Law Library so you can look this up. But basically, child support is exempt, household goods up to $12,000, books or works of art up to $5,000, a motor vehicle up to $15,000 in value. We have gone over these, so if you have specific questions, use this slide and go to the Nevada Law Library to find the specific exemption for you. If you have tools of the trade for your business, we have a $10,000 exemption. If you use your automobile for your work, you can exempt this, you can include it in your $10,000 exemption. Also understand you have a $15,000 general exemption for a motor vehicle, and we're talking about equity in the car, not how much it's worth. You subtract how much it's worth minus how much you owe, that's your equity. You are exempt up to $1 million in a pension or retirement savings. You have PERS or CalPERS or whatever, that is exempt. So these are some of the things that you can keep if you file for bankruptcy. There are insurance and welfare exemptions, Social Security, retirement, survivor's benefits, SSI, SSDI. If you get those benefits, you know what I'm talking about. Those are exempt. Public assistance under state welfare programs, they're exempt. Voc rehab benefits, life insurance proceeds. So you have a lot of exemptions under Nevada law. And again, the link to the Nevada Law Library will be in this video, so you can go straight to Nevada law and find these exemptions. Again, there's the Nevada wildcard exemption. You can get up to $10,000 to apply to any asset that's not covered. You can split your wildcard exemption over multiple items, but you cannot double it if you're filing your bankruptcy with your spouse. So just keep that in mind. If you have $13,000 in household goods, that extra $1,000 potentially would be liquidated in the bankruptcy and provided to your creditors. But because of this wildcard exemption, you can use that $10,000 extra to cover the shortfall in any of the other exemptions. Usually we use it for a bank account because a bank account isn't covered. You can use the wildcard exemption and keep up to $10,000 in savings when you go through a bankruptcy. How do you value property? Usually it's garage sale value for personal property like dishes, furniture, beds, linens, things like that. Vehicles, you're going to use the Kelley Blue Book or NADA, also NADA for mobile homes. Google, if you just, like you have a Fleetwood 1972 double wide, if you Google that, you can find what it's selling for and use that as the value. Of course, we're talking about $605,000 here, so usually the value of a mobile home is not going to exceed that. And of course, for real property, you can use Zillow. That usually works in bankruptcy court to figure out what the value of your property is. We are Nevada Legal Services, so if you want help with a bankruptcy, please call us. The numbers are up there in Northern Nevada, 800-323-8666. In Southern Nevada, 866-432-0404. We provide free legal assistance. We practice in bankruptcy court all the time, so give us a call if you need help.